Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here at the Open World Summit. It's been many years that has been leading up to this moment when we're, launching Flow for finally, and it's really exciting to be here and talk to folks about what we're doing. So the topic of this conversation was suggested by Wei, who's one of the organizers of this event and my coworker. And when he first suggested, I didn't know what he was talking about. And he had to remind me that this is actually something that we've talked about many times. We just never used that phrase. And in fact, it's something I've been thinking about for probably a year. And it all starts at Devcon in Osaka, which, believe it or not, was only 11 months ago. And for anyone who was there, I imagine, like me, it feels like it was an absolute lifetime ago. So Devcon is the periodic Ethereum Developer Summit. And this was my first Ethereum event after we had announced Flow. And frankly, I was a little nervous because I wasn't really sure how the Ethereum community would take the idea that we were building our own blockchain. And I really shouldn't have been worried because it's a really great community, really open. And we weren't the only team there that's building a blockchain. And yes, it was Ethereum focused, but it wasn't Ethereum specific. And I just talked to so many great folks, and talked to people who are building other blockchains, and a lot of people who are just there because they love this stuff generally. They're not especially into Ethereum or any other chain. They just think that they just sense the transformative nature of the technology that's coming. But the group of people that I found most illuminating to talk to actually were the people who are trying to build businesses on this technology, because that's the lens that we think about it at Dapper Labs. We think this technology is amazing and transformative, but at the end of the day, if we're not building sustainable businesses on this technology that end users find valuable enough to make a part of their lives, then it's all just a lot of research and hobbies. And so, of course, we're far from the only team that thinks of it in that way. And I really enjoyed talking to the other teams that were trying to build businesses. And some of these are bootstrapped teams. Some of them have done, crowdfunding. A lot of them have some form of venture backing. And I quickly realized that all of these teams that, who have, bet the future of their careers on figuring out a way to make a sustainable business on top of this technology, they sort of fell into two camps. There were people whose product or service would make sense on multiple chains. And so you have projects like Chainlink, you have node operators like Bison Trails, and those people were really open to talking to new chains. They are, obviously they're looking at each chain to make sure that it's, it's legitimate and the technology is sound and the product makes sense, but they're very open and excited to work with new chains that come along. But the other kind of teams are the people who are building typically smart contract based applications, dApps. And they kind of can't afford to be on multiple chains. They kind of need to pick to a chain, put their state on that chain, and build their dApp around that chain. And they were really afraid to move to any new chain. And what I realized is that these two things, the fact that the people whose businesses supported multiple chains were really open about adopting new chains. The teams that couldn't support multiple chains were really nervous about adopting any new chain. That the motivation was exactly the same, and the motivation was that no one knows, no one knew a year ago, no one knows, I think today, what the next chain is going to be, and no one wants to be on the wrong chain, and being on the wrong chain, being alone, not being connected to the rest of the community is scary, especially when, as I said, these are people who had bet their livelihood on being able to build a business with this technology. And the reality is, with 20 odd chains, whatever the number is, vying for attention and all claiming to be, the next big thing, it's highly likely that actually most of them are actually going to be the wrong chain. And so, I think it does make sense for these people to to be really cautious about that, and for the people who can support multiple chains to not be dogmatic about it, and to support all the chains that seem viable. And for the people who do sort of have to pick a single horse to hitch their cart to be cautious about making that move. And so the question that I should be going through your head is, well, why is this even the case? We often have situations where platforms compete, but as end users and even developers, we don't have to, that decision doesn't have to be so scary, right? You know, end users don't care whether or not you're using Apache or Nginx. And yes, there is some effort in porting from one to the other, but you don't really feel locked in. Same with like whether or not your app is running on Amazon's data centers or Google's data centers or someone else's. And so the question is, well, why is it not the case that in the world of dApps, where you can think of blockchain as being like one of these infrastructure providers, why are people so afraid to move to one? And what is the danger? What is the cost of moving from one to the other? And that's where we talk about this thing called composability. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about composability. Interestingly enough, the talk that I flew all the way to Osaka a lifetime ago, also 11 months ago, in order to give at Devcon was entirely dedicated to composability. And so, you know, if you want more detail on this topic, I encourage you to go and watch that talk. But I think I can give a high level essence of it. And composability is just a word that we use in the context of blockchain, where we say that, you know, when I build my software, I can build it on top of your software, and then you can in turn build that on top of my software. Now, of course, that's the way software has always worked. And so, you know, I don't, you know, why do we need this new word, composability? And the reason we need a new word is because up until this point, we've always been able to safely depend on other people's code, but we haven't been able to depend on their data, on their live state. And so, you know, I can use the same database software as Facebook. I can use the same infrastructure software as Facebook. What I can't do is go and, you know, even download my own data, let alone access, you know, my whole social graph, let alone access the social graph of the users of the software that we build. And smart contract platforms are unique because they allow every piece of software to be a rock solid foundation for the next set of smart contracts that come along. Because unlike open source software, the state is in there. And unlike APIs, once a smart contract is out in the world, it can't be changed, it can't be blocked. You can't have a situation like Twitter had, you know, 10 years ago, where they exploded in popularity because of the use of third-party client software. And then when they were big and popular enough, they cut off all of the third-party client software or restricted it dramatically. And, you know, we're used to, you know, I think we've all heard this quote ascribed to Isaac Newton, which is, you know, the reason he could see further is because he was standing on the shoulders of giants. But, you know, the reality is that there are no giants, right? Newton could see farther, not because he was standing on some giant's shoulders, but because he was standing on, you know, other people like him, brilliant people, of course. But he was no smaller or larger than the rest of them. It was just a stack of the same sized humans all the way down. And so the real power of Newton wasn't that he was standing on the shoulders of giants, that he was standing on the shoulders of 10,000 very intelligent people that came before him. And today we're standing on the shoulders of 10,000 people who are themselves standing on Newton's shoulders, which is, I guess, kind of a weird visual. And it's probably why Newton just said giants. But the smart contract technology makes this move so fast and makes that interoperability power so much stronger than anything we've seen in the world before this, that it warrants a new name, and that name is composability. So back in 2018, when we were planning which project we wanted to build after Cryptokitties, we were looking at what blockchain we wanted to build on. And we had an inkling about the power of composability. Our understanding has absolutely refined over the last 2.5 years, but we had an inkling that that was going to be really important. And most of the projects that were promising high scale without compromising decentralization, all of the projects that were promising high scale without compromising decentralization depended on some form of sharding. And they use different words for it, and there's, side chains, parachains, bridges, zones, et cetera, but ultimately they depended on some mechanism whereby instead of it being one shared state space where all of the code could talk to all the other code, we would break it up into little state spaces that could talk to each other asynchronously. And again, I don't want to go into the technical details, but it turns out that asynchronous communication makes composability much, much harder. Not impossible, but very, very hard. And believe me when I tell you that writing smart contracts is already hard enough. We don't need to add another complexifier. And so we felt the need to build our own blockchain, which of course ultimately became Flow. But so even though we built Flow explicitly to capture the power of composability, we also knew that composability that already existed on platforms like Ethereum was going to be a real barrier for new entrants, new platforms coming in and being able to attract people. And the way I always put it is that the time had passed for the mentality of just, if you build it, they will come. And so we had no illusions that when we were building our own blockchain, that it didn't matter how good the technology was going to be, that probably wasn't going to be enough on its own to win. Now, of course, we wanted to build great technology, and I think anyone who takes the time to dig into the technology behind Flow comes away impressed. But the history of technology is littered with the best technology not necessarily being the one that's chosen, because there's so much more to building an ecosystem than just choosing a technology. And so we knew that we couldn't count on somebody else to bring a great experience to this platform, even though we had designed this platform specifically to enable great experiences. And so for the last 2 years, we have spent an incredible amount of time and effort making sure that we have great products that are coming on Flow. And of course, the first and one that we're most excited about at the moment is NBA Top Shot. But we've also lined up products, to come out over the next, 6 months to a year in the form of the UFC license. We've got working with the team at Dr. Zeus to do something on Flow. And of course, inevitably, a new version of Cryptokitties that's designed to take advantage of the increased power of the Flow blockchain. But it was no good for us to build a platform that was just about us. We didn't want to be building on a niche chain, whether we built it ourselves or not. And so it was really important for us to form partnerships with other creators, teams like Ubisoft and Animoca and Warner Music, and as well as forming partnerships and giving tons of support to the people who create the enabling technology that fits between the chain or supports the dApps that are running on the chain. Things like OpenSea, working with Binance and Circle on the financial rails, working with Chainlink, who I mentioned before. And those relationships take a lot of time and effort, and like years of time and effort. Like we literally spent years getting to the point where we're able to announce partnerships with all of these people, because they don't want to form partnerships with a team that isn't going to be able to deliver what they say they are. And they're all doing their due diligence, and so that adds up to an incredible amount of effort on our part and an incredible amount of energy on their part to make sure that the relationship makes sense. And so I'm incredibly powerful of all that. And so here we are today, and we've done it. We have a blockchain that has some just absolutely incredible technology built that's forming the foundation of it, that looks like it has so many aspects to it that are fundamentally different than other blockchains, while still adopting some of the best ideas that you can find in other blockchains and integrating them into this new architecture. We have Dapper, the Dapper wallet experience, which is, I think, bar none, the best experience for onboarding into crypto that the world has ever seen. People can come into Top Shot, and through the power of Dapper, they can come with nothing but a credit card and an email address, and they can start buying crypto assets. And so we have this amazing situation where new users are able to come in, and you know, more than half of the users using Top Shot right now are people who came because of the basketball, not because of the crypto. They're able to come in, they're able to buy these crypto assets without even understanding what crypto is about. And back in the day when we launched Cryptokitties, you had to understand crypto before you could buy a Cryptokitty. And now you get to come in and you get to engage in Top Shot, start your collection, and then when that resonates with you, then you can learn about crypto. And that is incredibly powerful, because at that point in time, you're already bought in and you have that connection with it. And so that fear that I saw in the community a year ago of wanting to move, being afraid to move to the wrong chain, is something that we have worked incredibly hard. As much, probably more time and effort of Dapper Labs has been in making sure that that experience of being alone on a chain won't be true on Flow. And so I think that as a community of creators and Dapper developers, because for all the time and energy we put into Flow, Dapper is about creating experiences for end users first. And so I think that all the Dapper developers together, we have an opportunity to ensure that the chain that we move together, the Flow blockchain, isn't the wrong chain. That for at the very least, gaming and NFTs and entertainment, that you know, there may be other areas where, you know, other communities that form, but this one is not going to be an empty room. And so there's Flow is going to be a thriving community where we have, you know, sort of high polished crypto experiences like the ones that come from Dapper, that we start to see AAA, you know, gaming companies like Ubisoft and Animoca creating their first large scale crypto experiences, and where the people who are coming, that long tail where all the creativity comes from, can come in there and they can join that same platform and get that same experience by integrating with something like Dapper Wallet to bring their users into crypto so smoothly and easily. And so that all sounds really great, but there's an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room has the name DeFi. And right now, DeFi on Ethereum is completely on fire, in both the good and bad senses of that term, depending on when you're looking at it and which parts of it you're looking at. It's absolutely incredible. And, you know, talk about the power of composability, right? Like that whole ecosystem is about someone building a new building block that integrates 5 other building blocks and creates something brand new without them having to reinvent the wheel every time. And without having to, you know, necessarily break up the existing value that's being created, just being additive and creating more value. And it's completely amazing. The problem though is that what we're seeing is that the world of DeFi, which used to be called open finance in the early days, people talked about it as open finance, it's actually not that open. And it's not about like having credentials or knowing who, you know, is in there, but the reality is that the transaction fees are absolutely crippling because the network doesn't have the capacity to serve all of the people who want to use it. And so, you know, as we see in markets all the time, what ends up happening is that there's constrained supply, that it's the people who have the most resources who are able to access that. So DeFi is great if you have, say, 100K lying around that you want to throw into high-risk investments. so that your returns are likely to be enough to sort of counteract those eye-watering transaction fees that we see today. But I kind of thought DeFi was supposed to be about democratizing finance. I thought it wasn't just going to be for the fat cats with a lot of money, right? And so I think that there is no reason to think that there will be new hubs of DeFi built outside of Ethereum that can exist and perhaps exceed the size of DeFi on Ethereum without displacing a single transaction of what's happening on Ethereum. There are so many people clearly who want to use these facilities, and the room isn't big enough. And so I'm not willing to fight for block space at 200 Gwei, and I'm sure that many other people are not. And so I think that the opportunity and the pie is big enough that new communities can build up without old communities having to be torn down. And so I think that that's the essence of that word, that phrase, the Great Migration, is that I can make a guarantee that if you move onto Flow, you won't be alone. But your DApp will be next to amazing other DApps from creators that trust, and are proud to stand next to. If you are a user and you go onto Flow, I guarantee you that you won't be alone, and that you will have things to do on that network that are more, that go beyond just the meta effort of managing the network and staking and voting and governance and all these things, which of course Flow has, but we have the other things too. We have the dApps and the experiences and the things the things built on top of the technology that is what the technology is all about. And so I think that Flow will be, bar none, the blockchain with the most active users on launch day. I think that it will be the one that has the most user-facing dApps on launch day. And dare I say that it's going to have the best dApps. Namely, it's going to have NBA Top Shot on day one, which may be one of the most beautiful dApps ever built. And so if you're a dApp developer or you're a user and you're feeling this concern, you're feeling the paralysis of where you can go, which of these new amazing technology platforms you can go to without having to feel like you've accidentally gone onto the wrong chain, I can assure you that Flow is not going to be it. And this world is probably big enough for multiple ecosystems to exist. But unfortunately, many of the other ones are unlikely to have the same sort of bootstrapping, certain guarantees that we're able to give. So I hope that you'll all come and check out Flow. I hope that you'll all come and enjoy the launch party that we're going to have over the next little while. And I welcome you to join the Great Migration as we move to the next generation of blockchains. So that was the extent of my prepared remarks, but I think we have a facility to do some sort of Q&A. So I think that Wei is able to, and Megan are able to do that. Yeah, we've got some questions coming in. So just give me a moment to take a look at them, and I'm happy to address as many of them as I can. So the question is, how will Flow address node infrastructure for scalability? If nodes are locked to a specific amount of flow, then the problem of financial barriers remains. Yeah, I mean, there's a real difficulty there, and it's a trade-off that all of the any sort of decentralized design like this has to have, which is you want to have as many people participating as possible, but unfortunately the complexity of these systems grows pretty significantly with with the number of participants. And so the reality is that, you know, right now, we're launching, you know, software is never completely done, right? It's always changing, always growing, always getting better. And so the launch version of Flow is not by any stretch of the imagination the culmination of the vision of Flow. And, you know, and now that we've open sourced the node software, you know, we think the whole community is going to be engaged in helping move that forward. And so the reality is that until we're able to, you know, make some additional optimizations and whatnot, there will be limits to the number of people who are able to participate in actually running some of the node software. But I do think that the barriers are going to be, you know, lower than they are on many other chains, and they're going to be dramatically lower than they are on any other chain that doesn't resort to sharding. So if you have a sharded blockchain, you can, you know, sort of have an unlimited number of participants, but most of them aren't actually engaged in sort of, I guess, what I would call the interesting work. And so by making sure that we have this single state space, we ensure that the dApps that are being built are the most valuable. And so the number of participants that we're able to support today is in the hundreds, larger than any other you know, sort of single shared state blockchain. And so we're definitely going to continue to push that forward as we go along. Let's see, another question here. Isn't there a trade-off with scale and security? I think that's an excellent question, and there absolutely is. So it's actually this notion of, there's this notion of what's called the Scalability Trilemma. It goes by some other names, but basically the idea is that you can have decentralization, or you can have scale, or you can have security. You can't have all three of those things. You sort of have to choose at most two of those three things. And that is for a homogeneous blockchain, that I believe that's true. I don't think that anyone has sort of proven, has developed a system where that's not true. And so, well, how do we have any blockchains that are actually secure and scalable and decentralized, right? Because, you know, the Flow says it is, Ethereum 2 says it is, you know, all these other blockchains say they are. Well, one answer is to create sharding, right? Is to create all of these, you know, little experiences where each of them doesn't have scale, but collective they have scale. And, you know, as I said at the beginning, we rejected that idea because, you know, all of these little blockchains talking to each other, you know, even if we call them shards and they share some amount of security, that it dramatically limits the power of the dApps that can be built on them and increases their complexity. And so the route we take with Flow is we actually, we still have to make that trade-off for each part of the system, but we can make that trade-off differently for different parts of the system. And so all of the parts of our system where we're dealing with what we call subjective matter. So situations where there is no sort of, you know, ground truth, objective reality of sort of what is correct, right? Did my transaction come before yours, or did yours transaction come before mine? And so we make sure that all of those things are maximizing security and decentralization, which seems like they're limiting scale. But what we can do is we can make it so that the hard work, right, of actually doing the math, actually doing the computation, taking all of these transactions and updating the shared state that represents all of what the dApps are doing on the blockchain, we can pull it out of those nodes. And so we can have a different trade-off for each of the node types. So we have 4 different node types, and we have 2 node types that are dedicated to, you know, scale and security, but have limited decentralization, and that's the collector nodes and the execution nodes. And you might say, well, whoa, that's crazy, right? Like, why can, you know, you're saying that you have, you know, scale and security, but don't we need decentralization? Isn't that part of what makes these technologies powerful? Well, what we do is we make sure that those nodes don't have any determining power over what happens in the blockchain, and the execution nodes are the most powerful example of this, which is that the execution nodes have 0 choices. They are handed a block of work, and they're told, here is a very complex calculation, representing, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of transactions from different people around the world. Run these transactions in this exact order and tell us what the result is. By the way, we are going to check your work. And if you get it wrong, we are going to slash you. And if you get it right, we will pay you a reward. And those nodes can't do anything wrong, because with very high probability, any mistakes they make will be found by other nodes. And those nodes, the verifier nodes and the consensus nodes, those don't have high scale, but they don't need to, because they're not doing all the work. And so, yes, the trade-off exists, but what we can do is as a whole, the network doesn't have to experience that trade-off. We can have different parts of the network experience different parts of that trade-off. How do you see people being able to migrate their assets from existing full room like Ethereum to Flow? Yeah, convince overlords to bless the migration. Yeah, moving stuff between blockchains. It's interesting, right? Because it could be argued that almost all of the proposals for high capacity blockchains in the future have this problem. Like, how do you move assets from sort of one shard to another or one chain to another? And yet here we are today, where we have multiple blockchains and no one has actually really solved that problem very effectively. We do have a mechanism to move, sort of financial value between chains. And we don't even think about it in those terms, but, you can go to some sort of centralized exchange, and, there are loads of them, so there's no sort of single point of failure there. And you can always move your financial value from one chain to another. That's existed since, the days of Bitcoin and Litecoin. And so the more interesting question is how do I move the exact assets, especially things like NFTs? And the reality is that no one has an especially good answer to that. We're building a system that we think is going to work really great for Cryptokitties, but it will be a system that is federated, meaning it's not as fully decentralized as we expect the Flow blockchain to be, and it's not as decentralized as the Ethereum blockchain is sort of understood to be. And so we think that's okay for people who choose to opt into that, because I think we're trusted to be good stewards of Cryptokitties, but that doesn't really answer the question in the long run, and I'm not really sure if anyone has a good answer. We are talking to some teams who have some clever solutions for doing bridging, and we're doing our technical due diligence on those, and we're hopeful to see some of those bear fruit. The teams that we've approached are very excited to work with the Flow blockchain, and so assuming that those pan out, I think that we'll see some solutions there. Elaborate on metadata for NFT. What are the plans? Yeah, one of the design constraints of Flow was to just make sure that the constraints on computation were dramatically less than what we experienced on Ethereum. So Ethereum, storing data on Ethereum is just insanely expensive. Doing computation on Ethereum is insanely expensive, even when the gas prices aren't absurd. And so there was a really lot of effort. One of the advantages of making sure that the execution nodes are fully deterministic, and therefore we don't need to have a very large number of them in order to ensure the security of the network, is that that state doesn't need to be replicated as much. And so it should be the case that storage and computation are much, much cheaper on Flow than they are on other networks. And so that gives the ability for NFT creators to put more data and metadata on chain. So for example, the NBA Top Shots, they have on chain quite a bit of data. They have the name of the player and the team and the stats about the play, what kind of play it is, when it happened in the game, what date it was on, etc. And so that gives a lot of flexibility to other smart contracts who want to use those assets. They can actually read that underlying data. Now, for metadata like images, and for Top Shots, it's a video. That still is too much data to put on chain, but it's also data that doesn't need to be on chain because other smart contracts don't need to need to actually process that data. And so in that case, we are looking at technologies like IPFS and Filecoin and other decentralized storage systems like that, and trying to figure out how we can integrate those so that those are sort of more directly integrated in with Flow, and create hooks in at the programming level so that you can store these metadata hashes on chain, and that data will be taken care of, not directly on the chain, but on a system that people can trust. And so I wish I could say that that was all finalized and we knew exactly how that was going to work, but unfortunately we can't yet. But I think we are moving really in a strong direction there, and I think that I think that as a community, we have a pretty good idea of what that solution needs to look like, but there's a million details that we need to get right. And unfortunately, all the answers aren't easy. So it's gonna have to take a little while. How do you scale Flow to petabytes of state? Yeah, I mean, petabytes is it's a very big number. I think that people sometimes overestimate how long it would take to get to that point. But it's certainly the case that we are already planning for multiple terabytes of state, and the short answer is that over the near term, the next 2 to 5 years, we imagine that multiple terabytes of state is going to be the scale at which we need to solve. And the technology exists to do that in a pretty sound way. You can even get hosted computers from Amazon and Google where they have terabytes of RAM, not just SSDs or hard drive storage, but actual RAM that can be accessed directly by the CPU. And so that gets us pretty far. And then once you do get to the petabyte scale, then you have to start talking about doing a little bit more in terms of like having tiered storage solutions. Some of that stuff exists in the architecture phase. None of that has been implemented yet. But we think that the groundwork is there such that that sort of scale is achievable within this architecture, even if we don't have all of the details of how that's going to work worked out just yet. And that's just a matter of sort of trying to balance, right? Like, well, do we handle petabytes of state on day one? Well, then guess what? We can't ship in 2020. And so we probably don't need petabytes of state in 2020. And so let's solve the terabytes of state problem. And then as we start to outgrow that, then we can put more energy into some of these other efforts. But at a sort of theoretical level, at a sort of is the architecture capable of that? Yes, absolutely, because the architecture is designed so that state, when you get to state sizes of petabytes, that the state doesn't have to move between all of the nodes, and that's a fundamental aspect of Flow's design. So one of my co-presenters or coworkers pointed out that when I talk about moving to Flow, that anyone who wants to come and build on Flow is more than welcome to. There's no exclusivity requirement. I think that like I said early on, I think some apps only make sense to sort of have them be on one chain, at least until we have some strong bridging solutions. But for anyone who does have the ability or want to support multiple chains, we think that Flow is going to fit neatly into those ecosystems, and there's nothing that will prevent that. What differences are you seeing now in the NFT space versus when Cryptokitties first launched? Well, it's certainly the case that right now a lot of the NFT space is the hot trends in the last sort of month in the NFT space was finding interesting ways for NFTs and that notion of collectibles that have that real personal connection. Making sure that or finding ways for those things to participate in or reflect some of what was happening in DeFi. And I think that's really interesting. I think it is a shame that like NFTs, which our experience has shown is the you know, is an aspect of this technology that is that's much more approachable for, you know, your average consumer. That nonetheless, like now that we're, you know, now that could be a really interesting way to introduce people to DeFi. You know, we have the gas prices the way they are, and you know, even worse than they were when CK first launched. So I think that's interesting. I do think that the part of NFT space that we haven't seen as much of as I would like, and something that we really want to do on Flow, is the idea of and we saw it when Cryptokitties first launched, right? We even gave it a name, the Kittyverse. This idea that, you know, third parties, anybody who wanted to, could come along and build a new experience that worked with Cryptokitties. And they could build their own smart contracts, they could build their own dApps, and the Cryptokitties could come and sort of play in their playground, while still remaining the owner of the person who had the cat in the first place. So if you own cats, you could go and race them. If you own cats, you could go and dress them up. And none of those experiences needed to integrate with us, needed any special permission from us. And that's like a special form of composability that I think is really exciting. And that's something that when we are looking forward at Cryptokitties on Flow, that's a huge thing that we want to put more effort into. How can we make sure that people are able to tap into Cryptokitties in their own dApps? How can we make sure that people can sort of add functionality to kitties in a way that makes sense within their app, but doesn't, you know, change the way that people perceive the value of that kitty if they don't use that app? And so the follow-on question from, I think, the same person is, well, what can I do with my Cryptokitties when we migrate to Flow? And that is exactly what we're in the planning stages of right now, which is how can we take Cryptokitties and build a great new breeding game that works on Flow, but also make that a centerpiece of not just experiences that other people build, but that we build. And so we've been talking about things like a sort of a farm bill style, crop management game where your kitties are fundamentally the workers that you have. And so you can come in and you can play this game, and maybe you just have a few little kitties and you come in, you're more interested in this game than the kitties. That's fine. But if you have a giant kitty collection, then that's just one more way to play with your cats. So that's something that we're really looking forward to doing. That's something that we probably won't see until next calendar year. If all user accounts are their own storage, how can they provide off-chain storage? So this is something, again, it's in the architecture stages. It hasn't yet been implemented, in part because we don't think that we're going to run into sort of storage pressure for a little while, at least, sort of we have months, if not a year or two. But the basic idea is that so just so for anyone who doesn't understand, on most blockchains, and I'll use Ethereum as an example, your assets don't actually live in your account other than Ether itself. So your account, it has obviously has an address, right? You know, that hex string, and it has some Ether balance, but that's actually the only state in your account. The sequence number, or what they call nonce. And so that's the only state that's in your account. And all your other state, which kitties you own, which other NFTs you own, what other ERC20s you own, all of that actually lives in the smart contracts that define those. And it's a ledger model. So if you own 100 kitties, they don't live in your account. They live in the Cryptokitties smart contract, and next to each of those 100 kitties is your address, right? And so that's ownership, right? Like that's fine, but it does mean that the storage of the Cryptokitties smart contract, it's really hard to sort of the blockchain itself can't sort of fairly apportion whose state which state belongs to whom, right? And so when you start to look at situations where we need people to somehow manage the amount of storage they're using on chain and provide economic incentives for them to manage that storage responsibly, we can't do that when we have this ledger model, because we don't know which state sort of belongs to which user. And so one of the things we did with Flow is we made sure that your assets live in your account. And A, that's just like more logical, right? Like what do I own? Well, I just look in my account and all my stuff is there. On Ethereum, if you want to know what you own, you have to go and look in every single smart contract and see what you own, and because that's where that information lives. But the added benefit is that all of your data is in your account. And so so then the question is, okay, well, great, I've got all my data stored here, but let's say I have 1,000 kitties, that's starting to use up a lot of storage. And it's great that the system is, offering me economic incentives to manage that storage, but how do I do that, right? I don't want to get rid of my kitties. And so one of the things that that we've architected, but as I said, hasn't yet been implemented, is the ability to take some number of your assets or any kind of on-chain data and ask the blockchain to hash that data, keep track of the hash, and then allow me, right, the user, the owner of that data, to manage that, to keep track of that data off-chain in some way. Whether I put it in Dropbox or Filecoin, the blockchain doesn't care. I'm accepting responsibility for that, and I'm saying, look, I'm going to put that on my hard drive, back it up in Dropbox, and when I need that data again, I will send that data back to the blockchain. The blockchain can then hash that data, confirm securely that data hasn't been changed or modified in any way. And in the meantime, between the time that I sort of collapse that data into its hash and then I reintroduce that data securely, that I don't have to worry about that storage. That storage has no cost to the network, and so I can get some economic benefit from that. And so that, again, like we said in the early days, the next 6 to 12 months at the minimum, we don't think that those sort of storage costs are going to be especially concerning to users. But as time goes on, that's definitely gonna be something that we're able to do. So the next question was, I've heard talk about being able to collapse data and then rehydrate it when it's needed. Hopefully I answered that already. What are you most looking forward to developers building on Flow? I think that it's going to be, I think that what I'm most looking forward to is people building things that are fun entertainment experiences that don't fit the mold of what we would call a game today. And the analogy I would use is when mobile came out, right? So when mobile phones were new, and before, in the early days of cell phones, right, the only game you could play on your phone was Snake. The kinds of games that were popularized when iPhone and Android came out and everyone started carrying these touchscreens in their pockets were things that people who self-identified as gamers before the existence of the mobile phone didn't call games. they would turn their nose up. That's not a game, right? That's a time waster. That's like a desktop widget. And the reality is those kinds of games now, like in aggregate, have completely eclipsed what sort of traditional gamers call games. And the nice thing is that those two ecosystems completely coexist. If you like those kinds of games, you don't have to play them. Those ones over there, and if you like those, you can play those. And it turns out that, like, despite this like massive growth in mobile gaming and the fact that everyone talks about it as being the whole world of gaming, the traditional gaming market never went away. It grew. Now the mobile gaming market is bigger, but the traditional gaming market didn't shrink. It just didn't explode the same way mobile gaming did. And so what I get most excited about is people building experiences that today we might not think of as games, that are entertainment, they're hobbies, they're definitely, and I think 5-10 years from now, no one will think twice about calling them games, but which are very, very different from the kinds of experiences we can have now. I haven't had a chance to look at it in too much depth, but there's an experiment going on Ethereum right now called Dark Forest, where it's an exploration game, and they're using zero-knowledge proofs and hidden data and all of these interesting cryptographic mechanisms to create a game that, again, from my limited understanding of it so far, has some like aspects of games that you may have heard of before, but has a very different feel to it because it is built on decentralized technology, and that's what I get really, really jazzed about. And especially when those kinds of games have this interoperability, where it's not just an exploration space game, but it's an exploration space game where I can put my cats in spacesuits and have them fly my spaceships. And I think that's going to be really great. Do I think it's going to be just gaming experiences? No, not at all. Flow is explicitly not designed to be especially well suited for any particular niche. It is, however, what I think, and what Dapper Labs is betting on, it being how the vast majority of people will be introduced to this new technology. Is it what they're going to spend most of their time and effort on? Maybe, but it's almost certainly going to be like 100% of their first 100 hours of interacting with blockchain technology. And that's why it's so critical that that's the stuff that we're building and promoting right now. I think that there are all sorts of really exciting stuff that benefits from decentralized management. But I also think that people need to come and experience it. And, like I talked about with NBA Top Shot, they need to come and get engaged in these things. And from then they need to go and learn about crypto. We can't expect people to learn about crypto in order to engage with these experiences. Yeah, so someone was asking about our token sale. If you are outside of the United States and Canada, you should check out the CoinList sale that we're having right now. We're doing a community sale. This may have been mentioned, so I apologize if I'm repeating too much, but we're doing a community sale right now where we're offering tokens to community members for purchase at exactly the same terms as the pre-launch investors, all of the venture capitalists who invested in this blockchain over the last year as it was being built, and over a year now. And they're getting the same terms as they are. Now, we've had to cap that at $1,000 per because we wanted to make sure as many people as possible were able to participate at that price. And we also, unfortunately, had to restrict access to folks inside the United States and Canada, as well as China. And unfortunately, those were for legal reasons. The good news is that all of the people who are buying into this sale now internationally, all of the investors who've worked with us previously, will be able to take their tokens, and in the first year, they'll be able to stake them and delegate them. And any tokens they earn by providing that security service to the network are freely tradable. And so we expect that there will be plenty of liquidity in the next little while for people to be able to trade. And we imagine that that some number of services will allow for that token trading on their platforms. Although there's nothing we can announce there. And I think that is all the time I have. I want to thank everyone for coming and listening to me. And thanks for the great questions. I think that we touched on some really interesting stuff there. And I hope everyone here is super excited and jazzed about Flow. And I hope you'll come and experience what we think is going to be the best consumer blockchain experience, bar none. That's launching, more or less in the next month. So it's a great time to be engaged, and I'm glad to all have you here with us.